Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of America in Black and White, where we discuss and try to resolve the issues of the underserved, marginalized LGBTQ communities. Tonight, we have a very special guest. We have Pastor Joel A. Bowman Sr. For disclosure, Mr. Bowman is here strictly on his own and is not a representative of the United States Veterans Affairs. That is the VA uh, clinic that he works at in the city of Louisville. He is not a representative of them. This is him as a free-willed individual. And something about Joel A. Bowman Sr. is he's a native of Detroit, Michigan. Upon moving to Louisville, Kentucky in 1999, Joel began his ministry as a senior pastor since 2001. He has served as founder and senior pastor of the Temple of Faith Baptist Church in South Louisville. Joel is also a licensed clinical social worker with over 30 years of experience in the mental health field. He has practiced as a clinician in the states of Michigan, Kentucky, and Indiana. Joel has guest lectured at the Garland School of Social Work at Baylor University, Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville, Campbellsville University, Carver College, Truett Theological Seminary, and the Baptist Seminary of Zimbabwe. A respected thought leader and freelance writer, Joel has been quoted in the Washington Post, USA Today, and the Associated Press, the Christian Post, and the Baptist Press. Joel and his wife, Nanette Mitchell Bowman, have two daughters, Kayla and Katie, as well as one son, Joel Jr. They also have one informally adopted daughter named Michaela. We're having he's having some difficulties here actually getting on here. We will be on in just a second. Okay. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Joel Bowman Sr. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you so much, Charles. Glad to be here.
So besides the bio that I just read, is there anything else that you'd like to add to your bio?
No, sir, I think we're good.
Alrighty. Well, so we'll just go right on into this wonderful interview. Can you tell us what inspired you to pursue a career in social work, particularly with the VA?
Well, first and foremost, what inspired me to pursue a career in social work in general was simply my desire to help people. I know that that sounds a bit trite, a bit cliche, but that honestly is my answer, that I wanted to be of help to humankind. Now, specifically as it relates to the VA, I have, I'm the son of a World War II veteran. My dad was in Normandy during the D-Day invasion. If he were still living, he would be 102 years old. And so I've always had a love for veterans, in as much as my dad was one. And so when I had the opportunity to work, first of all, with the DOD, I served and provided mental health services to active duty soldiers. And then from there, I transferred to the VA. So that's kind of how I ended up at the VA. However, the earlier part of my career was focused on providing mental health services to children, youth, and their families. And so I've kind of been all over the gamut in terms of social work.
Okay. And so I'm sure, basically with in the process of working with veterans, I'm sure that that in itself has added an enormous amount of volume to the work that you're doing.
Indeed.
So, like, what are some of the things that you do with the work that you do at the VA?
So, first and foremost, I provide mental health services to any veteran that has a particular mental health diagnosis, or perhaps they're in crisis. And my current job with the VA is focused primarily upon treating veterans that have substance use disorders. And I previously, for the previous 8 years, I was working in a regular outpatient setting at a VA clinic. And now I am engaged in more community-based work through our homeless veterans program. And so the veterans that I serve were previously homeless, and now they're currently in a home through a partnership between the VA and HUD, the Department of Housing Urban Development. They have Section 8 vouchers by which they can pay their rent every month. And so my role is to assist those veterans with substance use disorders to remain in recovery so that they're not at risk to lose their housing once again.
You know, that's some really good work, and I think I think most of these Veterans Affairs offices in the various states, I think a lot of them are trying to get to that point because I know a lot of them are not. What is the have you heard what's like the end goal, or what are they working on in order to make that happen pretty much throughout the VA, throughout the country? Have you heard anything about that?
To make what happen, Charles?
As far as the providing the apartments, the housing for
Mhm.
those that are homeless.
Yes, so that's happening all over the VA across the country. And the program that I'm employed by specifically is called HUD VASH. And again, it's a partnership between HUD and the VA. And so our goal is obviously to end veteran homelessness. And we have made some strides in that regard, but we have a long way to go.
Mm. Can you describe a typical day in your role as a clinical social worker at the VA?
So the particular position that I'm in is a remote position. So a lot of what I do is either at home or out in the community. I really don't have to be in our clinic site unless there's a meeting. And so typically I check in at about 0800, 8 o'clock in the morning with my teammates. And then at 9 o'clock, we do a daily huddle where we basically come together and staff several cases and determine if there are particular needs that we need to be made aware of. And then from that huddle, either we will go into another meeting, depending upon the day. But after those meetings, then that's when we hit the streets and we go out into the community and we actually meet with veterans. Usually, we meet with veterans within their apartments, within their homes, or we meet them at some designated spot in the community here in Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh wow. So are these people already they have housing that's either just not really good housing that you guys are putting them in, or are you out recruiting for those that are just on the homeless side?
Most of the veterans that I serve in our program have already been housed. They've been
Oh,
placed in stable housing in a particular apartment. We do have case managers who are outreach workers, and they actually go out literally on the streets and identify persons that need housing, veterans that need housing, and then they enroll them in the process in our programs where eventually they are placed in homes. However, in my particular position, I generally see veterans at the time that they've already been placed in a stable home.
okay. Um, so how do you approach counseling veterans who are experiencing homelessness?
I approach them as I would any other human being. So, at the core of the social work profession is a respect for the worth and dignity of every human being. So, whether people are homeless or maybe they are dealing with a substance use disorder or maybe they've been victimized in terms of sexual abuse or physical domestic violence. It matters not what their background is. The approach is always the same in terms of acknowledging their worth and dignity. And so, I treat them with the utmost respect, let them know that I am there to serve them, let them know that regardless as to what has happened in their past, that, they're a veteran and they have earned these services that we're providing, and it's an honor for us to provide them. So that's at the core of how I approach any veteran that I'm working with.
So, what are some of the biggest challenges you face when working with homeless veterans?
I think that there is some similarities between unhoused veterans and veterans who perhaps have been in prison or incarcerated. You know how persons who have been in prison so long, they become institutionalized and they become basically acculturated to that particular lifestyle. And it's the same with unhoused veterans, is that if they've been on the street for a while, that becomes their life. It becomes
Mhm.
comfortable, it becomes familiar. And so oftentimes there's a difficult transition from a veteran who has been living in a community of unhoused veterans or unhoused people in general, and then transitioning them into a stable home is oftentimes not easy because they are, again, institutionalized. They are used to living out on the street on their own and perhaps periodically going into various shelters locally. And so the real challenge is helping them to make that transition into stable housing and quote unquote normal life.
So, can you share a success story from your work with homeless veterans?
Oh, I can share many success stories. I can share various stories of persons who, again, were living out on the street. They had no employment, they had no savings, and oftentimes they had no income, period. And eventually, we're able to transition them into stable housing, and many of them are able to get into recovery from their particular addiction and gain some sobriety. And then after that, they're able to actually get some employment, depending upon how old they are as veterans. And we have a number of veterans who are able to get into some stable employment and become a contributing member of society. And so we actually have, at a certain point, individuals can graduate from our program as they have become self-sufficient. And sometimes that takes a year, 2 years. Sometimes it takes even longer than that. It depends on each veteran.
Okay. How do you collaborate with other organizations to provide housing for homeless veterans? And I know you mentioned the program that you guys are working with HUD. How did that come to be?
Well, it's a program that largely was given its impetus by President Obama. Uh, we certainly credit him for having the vision to expand the opportunities to house unhoused veterans. And as it pertains to various entities in the community, we have the Coalition for the Homeless here in Louisville, which is a large networking organization that we are connected with. We deal with the local housing authority, the Louisville Metro Housing Authority, and through that networking, there are names given to us of veterans who could perhaps benefit from our program. So there's an array of entities and organizations in Louisville with which we partner. And through those partnerships, we are then able to connect veterans who are in need of housing to that housing opportunity.
Are there any other agencies other than HUD that you guys partner with when it comes to the homeless vets program?
Yes, as I just mentioned, the Coalition for the Homeless, Louisville Metro Housing Authority would
Oh,
be kind of two of the major entities with which we partner. And there are a number of other organizations that we partner with, and especially the shelters locally. We partner with them, and there are a number of different homeless shelters in Louisville, too numerous for me to name right now.
right. So, what strategies do you use to help veterans transition from homelessness to stable housing?
Each of our veterans is assigned a case manager, and that case manager is a licensed clinical social worker, as I am. So these are persons who are trained and certified to provide therapy, not just case management. And so they are very much well skilled to engage with the veterans, to build that rapport, to share with them the various aspects of the programming, and they meet with them on a regular basis. Usually at the beginning, they meet with them more frequently, as often as several times a week, once a week, and then it eventually spreads out to less frequent contact as each of the veterans are becoming more and more self-sufficient. It's ultimately our job to work ourselves out of a job, if that makes sense, because we want to empower veterans so
Right.
that they can be self-sufficient. And so the case management piece is kind of the nuts and bolts piece. We also have a registered nurse who has an earned doctorate in nursing, and she assists veterans with healthcare needs. We also have a nurse practitioner that works with our program that also has an earned doctorate, and it is her task to prescribe mental health medications to the veterans. So we have a number of different services that wrap around each veteran, inclusive of primary care. We do have primary care services that are available at our various clinics, as well as our medical center here in Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, wow. So, do you guys after is there such as these veterans getting out the program? And if so, do you guys like stay connected with them at some point or another to see how things are still going?
Yes, there is a system by which we follow up even after they graduate from the program. Uh, each and every case manager has a system where they receive a tickler on their calendar that says, you know, I need to reach out to so and so, check on him, see how he's doing since he's graduated. So, yeah, there's a follow up to the program even after graduation.
Wow, that is wonderful. Um, how do you address the mental health needs of veterans in your care?
So basically, as we talk to each veteran, we try to identify what the needs are. And some of the veterans have previously been in care with the VA and actually have a medical history with us. And we can look at their chart, look at their medical record, and determine, you know, historically, have there been mental health issues? If so, what are they? And we tailor the services around that. If they've not previously been enrolled with the VA, we simply do a psychosocial assessment to determine what those needs are. And based upon the results of that psychosocial assessment, we are then in a position to target our services to those particular mental health needs.
What role does community support play in your work with the homeless veterans?
Well, anytime that we are trying to house unhoused veterans who have been out on the street for a while, it's going to take a village of people, a village of resources networking together to make sure that those persons are stabilized in housing. And so resources can come from just about anywhere in the community. We have to be creative and think outside of the box. We have various organizations that donate clothing items. We actually, through our volunteer services department in our local medical center, we have individuals that say they want to volunteer with the VA. They can be connected with our program and they can provide support, whether that's in the way of in-kind donations or perhaps there are services that they're aware of in the community and they can network us to those services. So any number of different ways we can collaborate with persons within the community to make sure that each and every veteran is provided with what they need.
So, how has your work at the VA influenced your perspective on social justice and advocacy?
I think it's influenced it to the degree that social justice is something that really impacts every area of life. Because when we look at our veteran population, there is a disproportionate amount of African American veterans who end up being homeless. There is a disproportionate amount of persons with mental illness ending up being unhoused. And so when we look at the racial or ethnic disparities, when we look at the disparities with regard to mental illness, those individuals are often the ones that end up in the system, as it were. And so as I think about social justice, I consider the fact that it is not by accident that we have a number of veterans with mental illness that end up being homeless. It is not by accident that we have a number of Black and brown individuals that end up in the system. It's because, you know, we live in a society in which there is systemic racism, systemic injustice. And so therefore, you have individuals who perhaps had a previous criminal record. And because of that previous criminal record, they become marginalized in society and ostracized. And oftentimes they end up getting mental illness in their lives. And as a result of that, for whatever reason, they're not connected to the necessary services. And perhaps they need to be on medication and they're not on medication. And they decompensate to the point where they're out on the street. So social justice is something that really impacts every area of life. And wherever you see vulnerable populations, whether it's, you know, those who are homeless or other individuals, you can believe that at some point there's been some inequity, there's been some injustice that has resulted in them being in the position that they're in.
Wow. So, dude, we have to jump on that probably the next time we get you back on the show because I want to ask one other question here when it comes to this social work here at the VA. So like, have you guys pinpointed or were you able to pinpoint any particular situation or cause that has led these veterans to get into this homeless situation?
Um, as I mentioned before, you have the issue of substance abuse, and
Mhm.
you also have the issue of mental illness. And then there are some of our veterans who have a dual diagnosis of both mental illness and substance use disorders. And so
Oh,
those two things can make a veteran extremely vulnerable, and they end up in the position where they're unhoused. And substance use disorders and mental illness can disconnect people from their own families. And when they're disconnected from their own families, they become isolated and they become vulnerable and they're all by themselves oftentimes. And so our job is to try to get them the services that they need and get them reconnected. And one of the success stories that I think about, you asked me about that earlier, has to do with a particular veteran with whom I was working, who was totally disconnected from his family because of his addiction to crack cocaine. And as he got into our program and as he got sober and he began to experience a higher degree of self-sufficiency, eventually he reconnected with his family. They're on great terms right now. He's currently in a new apartment and is doing quite well and has almost a year of sobriety. So that's one success story that I can point to. We do need to, however, Charles, put the disclaimer out here. We should have done it at the beginning. You probably did it before I got on, that I am
I
not
did.
here representing the VA.
I
I
did.
am here as a mental health clinician who happens to work for the VA. I'm not in an official capacity right now, though we are talking to some extent about my work at the VA.
Yes, I did do that originally. So,
Great,
well,
great.
thanks for reiterating.
Yes, sir.
Let's transition to your pastoral work and counseling.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell us what led you to become a pastor, and how was your journey been so far?
So interestingly, I'm bivocational, meaning that I work both in a secular field as a social worker and then, of course, in ministry as a pastor. So let me back up a little bit and say that technically I became a social worker before I became a preacher or a pastor. So
Okay.
in 1991, I got my Bachelor of Social Work from Wayne State University in Detroit. In 92, I got my Master of Social Work and I began to work in the field. But during that period in which I was in undergrad and graduate schools, I had been contemplating a call to ministry. And finally, I acknowledged my call to ministry in 1994, and I preached my initial sermon in 1994 at Second Baptist Church of Detroit, which is my home church. And as I got involved in ministry, eventually I was appointed as assistant pastor of another church in Detroit, and I was ordained in 1996. And I was the chief assistant to my pastor at the time, and really cultivated a love for pastoral care. My pastor was willing to trust me with various tasks that sometimes he would engage in. And as a result of that, I kind of got a taste of what it would be like to be a senior pastor of a church, to be a head pastor of a church. And so I began to contemplate a more specific calling to pastoral ministry and began to apply to various churches in Detroit and around the country. And eventually I applied to a church here in Louisville, Kentucky, and was called upon to candidate for that church, preached a couple of times, was elected pastor of that church, and I served in that capacity for 2 years. And then when I resigned from that pastorate, I was led to become founding pastor of my current church, which is the Temple of Faith Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky. And I've served in the capacity of founding and senior pastor for 23 years, since 2001. So I've been doing that in correlation with my other work as a social worker.
Oh, wow. How do you integrate your social work skills into your pastoral counseling?
So, as I indicated to you before, as we were talking individually, personally, I have to, because of the Kentucky Board of Social Work and our code of ethics, I have to make sure that I keep my two roles separate. But by the same token, even though the two roles of pastor and social worker are separate, obviously they do complement one another. And so as a pastor, I'm starting out kind of ahead of the game in comparison to most other pastors that don't have any background in social work or mental health. So as I am providing pastoral counseling, I can do so bringing to bear the training I've had in the School of Social Work at Wayne State. So
Mhm.
I have a keener insight in terms of maybe the causes of certain problems that members might have. I have insight in terms of maybe there is a need for professional clinical counseling from another social worker or a psychologist or some other helping professional. At that point, I am equipped to make a referral. And as I indicated to you before when we were talking, if it has become clear to me that a member needs something deeper than just regular pastoral care or pastoral counseling, then I am very quick to refer them outside of the church. Because again, I am not serving in the capacity as a therapist at my church, but rather as a pastor. So I can provide pastoral care, I can do premarital counseling, I can intervene with members who are in crisis, but periodically, I'll have a member come to me with a problem that is so extensive that it's going to require professional intervention outside of what we can do at the church. For instance, I've had a number of members come to me who have been suicidal. And so therefore, I have connected those individuals with the emergency services that are needed. They go and they get a psych eval, and they're oftentimes admitted into an inpatient setting. And for those who are not actively suicidal, maybe they're very depressed, they then can be referred to a therapist or counselor in the community. So the church can oftentimes be a launching pad into other services that these individuals need. But for those members who just simply need basic pastoral care, certainly I can provide that in my office. We have leaders who are able to support me in that regard. Uh, Sometimes you have members who uh, lose a loved one. A loved one dies and they're dealing with some basic grief and loss issues. We can provide bereavement counseling for such individuals. However, there are individuals who begin to suffer from what we call complex grief. And that complex grief may morph into, full-blown clinical depression. In those instances, such individuals need to be referred outside of the church, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. Now, tell me, can you tell us this? The majority of the members, or all of the members at your church, are they all from that community, or is it like just diverse group members that are there at your church?
It's very diverse. We do have some members that live in the immediate community in which the church lies, but frankly, we pretty much have a commuter church. People
Okay.
commute from various parts of Louisville, the Metroplex. We have some members that come from West Louisville. We have some members that come from Eastern Jefferson County, which is kind of the suburban area. We have members that come from South Louisville, which is the area in which I live. So it's a variety of different geographical areas from which we draw. There was a time when we were more of a neighborhood church in terms of drawing more from the neighborhood, but that was prior to the destruction of the Iroquois homes, which was a housing project. It was, in fact, the largest public housing complex in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, which was destroyed, it's about 12, 15 years ago.
Mhm.
And we recently have seen the groundbreaking for a new senior complex that they're building on the grounds where the projects used to be. So there is an opportunity for us to do some outreach and begin to see more individuals from the immediate community, from the immediate neighborhood come into the church.
Okay. Can you share an example of how your pastoral counseling has made a difference in someone's life?
Yes, I'm thinking of there was a particular church anniversary. I can't remember which church anniversary it was. The house was packed, and the spirit was moving in the congregation. We were having a great time just celebrating what God had done in our midst. And I had to walk outside of the sanctuary to go to the restroom. As I was coming back to my seat, after going to the restroom, I had a lady who was visiting the church on that day, and she whispered in my ear, she said, "Pastor, I am thinking seriously about taking myself out and my children out who are here with me in the service." Now,
Mm,
she was literally talking about murder suicide. Okay. And so, in the midst of the service, I was able to clarify some things with her. I did a verbal contract with her that she would not do anything to harm herself or anyone else during the service. And immediately after the service, she came with me into the pastor's study, and I was able to do some further assessment to determine that even though she had made that statement to me, there was not an immediate need for her to go to the hospital, but we did connect her with some emergency services, and she was eventually able to be referred for professional counseling outside of the church. And I share that with you to indicate that it's important to determine whether or not a person has a specific plan. Some people in the midst of their mental illness, will make certain statements that are designed to elicit immediate attention. But that does not necessarily in every case mean that they are of immediate risk to harm themselves or someone else. And because I had my social work skills on board, I was able to make that call. But I do want to say, as a caveat, that it is better to be safe than sorry. Obviously,
okay.
not everyone brings to the pastoral ministry the same set of skills I bring. And so, if you are just the typical pastor who is confronted with something like that, there may be a situation in which you may need to call the police, right?
Mm, right.
You may need to call an ambulance to come and to transport that person to the hospital. It is always better to be safe than sorry. And particularly if a person comes to you and they are articulating a specific plan to harm themselves or someone else, then all bets are off at that point. You need to call 911.
Yep. Yeah, so I'll tell you, this is again, I appreciate you so much for being here because all those things that you mentioned prior, and as we're discussing today, is the importance of mental health.
Hmm.
And what we always try to do is for every week that we have a show, we like to at least try to have at least one mental health person that's able to come and talk mental health to the audience because you know as time has passed, as we've gotten into, especially further into this year,
Hmm.
you're seeing more and more of these mental health cases, where people are not as fortunate to have someone like yourself at hand that
Right.
can help them to calm that down and to get them where they need to be.
Hmm.
Because sometimes when people run out and they just instantaneously call the police, the police sometimes in most cases have actually shot and killed these people.
Right.
you
Right.
know and so it's just one of those things that I'm sure that as we appreciate what we're getting today, I'm very sure that your congregation appreciates you more than you can ever imagine.
They do, and I certainly appreciate them. By the way, I am not the only person who happens to be a mental health clinician in our congregation.
Hmm.
We have two sisters. They're actually twins. One is named Sharika, the other is Sharonda.
Hmm.
Sharika is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and
Hmm.
Sharonda is a licensed clinical social worker like me, and
Hmm.
they are both in private practice.
Oh
And
wow.
so I mention that because even in small to mid-sized churches like mine, it's important that pastors and leaders do an assessment in terms of who is a member of the church and what their vocation is.
Hmm.
Because if you have mental health clinicians in your church, then those persons can be utilized as a resource. You know, they may not necessarily be the ones providing the counseling or the therapy, but they are in a position where they can make a referral very, very easily. So
Right.
it's important that every pastor, every church leader do an assessment to determine, okay, what are the skill sets that are within the body, within the congregation, that would be of assistance to us if there's a member that's dealing with a mental health issue.
What are some common issues you address in your pastoral counseling sessions?
Yeah, so I mentioned two of those before. One would be premarital counseling. So my general rule personally is that I do not officiate weddings in which the couple has not engaged in some sort of counseling in
Mm,
preparation for marriage, whether that counseling is done by myself or someone else. And that's because, obviously marriage is a sacred thing. It is appointed and anointed by God. And so that's one area in which I'm engaged in pastoral care, providing premarital counseling or referring couples to someone else to do the premarital counseling. Bereavement counseling is something that is pretty common, obviously, in every church. In every church, you periodically have deaths. Whether it's an actual member or a relative of a member. And so, a lot of what we do as pastors is provide bereavement counseling. Um, as I mentioned before, for some people who have complex grief, they're going to need something a bit more extensive outside of the church. There's crisis intervention. I've had situations in which, for instance, a family that's affiliated with our church there was a drive-by shooting on their street, and a bullet ended up going through their window into their house. Now, fortunately, in that case, no one was harmed, but yet there were some emotional and psychological difficulties that resulted from that. That's traumatic to have gunshots literally entering into your house. And so I personally went over to the home and just provided some general support to them and helped them to process exactly what they had experienced. And they were able to gather themselves and move on from there. And so that's one area in which I had to do crisis intervention. I've had another situation in which a relative of one of our members was gunned down in their vehicle, along with their girlfriend, their partner. And so obviously that was a very tragic situation that I was needing to get involved with. And incidentally, there was their daughter unfortunately witnessed this event. Thank God she survived, but I had to assist the family in identifying a place where they could take that little girl for counseling. So those are some tangible examples of um, pastoral care that I provided. Now, you have conflicts in the church wherever you have individuals um, in the congregation. They're human beings, and we as human beings are prone to have conflicts. And, sometimes I have to do conflict resolution with
Mhm.
members of the church. So those are some tangible examples of some things that we're involved with.
So, how do you support individuals dealing with trauma and grief in your congregation?
Well, first of all, I try to normalize trauma and grief. I mean, trauma and grief are two things that are part of our human condition. And all of us, at some point in our lives, are having to deal with it. So the first thing I do is to normalize these things. These are normal part of life. Whatever they are feeling is normal. As it relates to grief, I may share a little something regarding grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, for instance, is a person, a model in terms of looking at different stages of grief. Right, the depression, uh, the guilt, the anger, acceptance. Those are various that people have to navigate through. And so, part of what I do as was providing some basic education about trauma and grief. For instance, the person has been traumatized to the extent that they have post-traumatic stress disorder, becomes a case to be referred outside for ongoing. But there are individuals who experience trauma and they're able to back from that. And that, of course, would be in my purview as a pastor.
So, what role does faith play in your approach to counseling and support?
Now you're talking specifically as a pastor?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So it has everything to do with it. So, I firmly believe that every human being has been created in the image of God, and therefore they are treated with dignity and respect. I believe that every human being is like we have a unique set of fingerprints. Every person differently. Um, while we have some similarities among ourselves, different. And so my faith and my understanding of the Bible that each human being has uniqueness, and I tailor my ministry to the unique needs of that particular individual. Christian clergy person, as a Christian pastor, I believe that Jesus, and therefore they are loved, and so a part of what I pastoral counselor is to just let them know that they're loved. Situation that they're dealing with, no matter what things that they've done, that have a criminal past. I've got members who have done things in their lives that they've been ashamed of. And so I reassure them that number one, God loves them. And then number three, our congregation loves them and accepts them. So those are some ways in which my faith as a Christian counseling and engagement with members or visitors.
So, how do you balance your responsibilities as a pastor and a social worker?
It all has to do with self-care. Obviously, I'm working in two different roles. Um, And so I have a self-care plan, exercise, making sure I get adequate rest, making sure that I leisure activities that I enjoy. As you know, I'm a freelance writer. That is therapeutic for me is to do writing. And recently had 3 pieces published in Baptist News Global, and each of was helpful in terms of taking my mind off of pastor and social worker and doing something a little bit different. Uh, even though those inform and shape my writing, when I am writing an article, it does afford me the opportunity to do something a bit different do in either my role as a social worker or as a pastor. So, writing is a part. I love being out in nature, being out in God's creation. I'm at my house now in the kitchen, and you can see the trees, the green space behind me. To have a house that our subdivision run a community forest area that has a walking trail. So I have easy green space, and sometimes when I'm feeling stressed, I simply go out and enjoy nature, and that's a part of my self-care plan. So in terms of navigating those 2 roles, I engage in self-care, and the other piece is particular people that are part of my support system. So I've got colleagues and other mental health professionals with whom I can talk if I'm stressed on the job. Pastoral side, I have friends of mine who are in ministry, in whom I'm going through a tough time as a pastor. And what I find is that pastors and a lot of mental health professionals who are isolated themselves and encourage those who are in ministry and those who are doing clinical to make sure that they have a support network that they can trust in, people who will keep confidences. It's critically important that support system.
So, what are
I'm
some
still
of the
here. I need to make
what
sure.
are some of the, go ahead.
I'm still here. I need to make sure this is plugged in right, or my battery is going to run low. But you can go ahead, Charles.
What are some of the unique challenges you face as a pastor in today's society?
I would say one of the in today's society is having to do with the fact that not go to church as once was the case, particularly we in the Black community, we tend to be more religious and likely to be connected to a faith community than the white population. There's been a decrease in terms of increase. There are generations of Black folk, I think, in America who except for a wedding or a funeral. And so as a pastor, with the fact that my ministry cannot merely be confined within the 4 walls. My role as a pastor is something that I carry with me to some such that if I am able to engage on the street regarding things that are spiritual in nature, that provides me to be a witness for Christ, and also to disclose that I am a pastor. And for some people, they've perhaps have had a negative interaction with pastor, or they, the problem of clergy sexual misconduct. You have individuals intimately who have engaged in abuse of power and have violated. And so you have a number of people who are not unchurched because they are de-churched in that they have, in effect, been chased away because of some severe trauma or some severe abuse of power. And so one, I think, as a pastor in these days and times, is really to trust with those who have been in, who've never been in church before, or to rebuild trust who have been in church, to let them know that not every pastor is like that. There are pastors that have integrity, who can be trusted. There are pastors that genuinely listen and listen without being judgmental. And so the challenge is to kind of, in a way, redeem the role of some, because, quite frankly, some of us as pastors serve service, maybe not necessarily through a specific abuse of power, and some lapse on our part that has caused some. As I interact with people in the community, I try to do so. Not everyone has had a positive experience with church, or even if they may have heard some negative things about someone's church experience away from connecting with a local church. And so I think as we're in a position right now where we have to understand that most people are not just come to church anymore. We have to create opportunity with people just on a one-to-one basis, so that they see us number weeks. Sometimes the thing that can be a barrier as
Ladies and gentlemen, look like we just lost Pastor Bowman. Let's try and get him back on.
I'm back.
Yes, sir.
Sorry about that. My iPad, for whatever reason, was not keeping a charge.
Okay. Um, we were well. Let me just move on here to this next question. How do you foster a sense of community and support within your church?
Um, I think simply by providing opportunities for the membership to spend time together. So um, I think one thing that we as pastors can look at is how the early church functioned in the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, it says that they continue steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, the breaking of bread, prayer, fellowship. And so I think that it is important that we have uh, periodic times where we can spend together. So that could happen in Sunday school. And we intentionally at my church make all the Sunday school classes very interactive to get people talking about real life issues, so that, it's not just, these high esoteric principles that we're talking about that people can't relate to, but rather we really try to present the Bible in such a way that people see it as being relevant. So, um, in small groups, in Sunday school classes, that can help foster that sense of community. You know, Obviously, having meals, eating together. We know that obviously fellowship goes beyond just eating, but let's face it, that's one way in which people can get together and foster a sense of community. Also, doing ministry together. We have in our church a family life center that is a separate nonprofit. It is an affiliate of our church. And as a part of that, we have a food distribution program. And we feed over 1,000 people per month through that. And that is done primarily with volunteers. We do have a couple of paid staff, but beyond that, we have volunteers both from our church and from the community that serve. And so I think by giving people the opportunity to serve together and to do ministry together is something that can foster a sense of community.
What advice would you give to someone considering a career in pastoral counseling?
Well, that's kind of a tricky question because, contrary to what many might believe, you don't have to be a senior pastor or the head pastor of a church necessarily to do pastoral counseling. In fact, in my particular theological belief, is that there are people that have the gift of shepherding or pastoring who will never assume the pulpit as a preacher. However, God has gifted them to care for people. I believe that there are people who serve as deacons, and there are other individuals within the church that can do pastoral care. And usually, and I'm speaking from the perspective of kind of like the typical African American church, usually that's not a paid position. Usually that is a role that is fulfilled by a person that is a member of the church, and they're volunteering to do that work. Again, whether it's a deacon or some other uh, minister of the church can provide pastoral care, and it's not necessarily a career that they are doing or fulfilling, but it's simply a ministry that they're providing to the church and the people who come in contact with the church. So I would just challenge people to have a more comprehensive view of what it means to engage in pastoral counseling. Now, in that category, you have people who are lay counselors, They may not have necessarily any formal training in counseling beyond what they can get within the church through leadership development, but yet they can fulfill the role of a pastoral counselor in a very generic sense, simply providing the ministry of presence. There are people in the church who have taken it upon themselves to send out greeting cards to those who are experiencing the loss of a loved one. That can be a form of pastoral counseling. There are other individuals who make it their business to be present when a family church member lost a family member, and they simply need someone to be there with them. That's the ministry of presence. So that can be a form of pastoral counseling or pastoral care in a generic sense. But then, of course, you have people who are connected with churches. Perhaps they're in ministry, and perhaps they're in seminary and receiving some sort of training in pastoral care, pastoral counseling. Then obviously they're equipped to do something a little bit more extensive, perhaps assisting me in providing bereavement counseling or premarital counseling. The senior pastor does not have to do it all. In fact, that's why the Bible says in Ephesians 4 that God has given persons like the pastor for the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry. So part of my role as pastor is to equip others to do much of the work that I would do, and I ought not do, because obviously one man or one woman cannot do it all in the church. And so it's incumbent upon me to equip others to fulfill some of those roles, inclusive of providing pastoral care in the church.
Well, so before we're gonna pivot to the last part of this wonderful interview, and we're gonna talk about your freelance writing.
Okay.
But before we get to that part, I wanna just step aside for a second, and I wanna do a word association part here with you, where I want to mention a word, and I want to get the very first thing that comes to your mind when you hear this word.
Okay.
First word is help.
Help or health?
Help.
Help. HELP.
Yes.
Christian.
Care.
Pastoral.
Comfort.
Grief.
Need.
Ministry.
Health.
Mental.
Homeless.
Veteran.
Housing.
Development.
Assessment.
Psychosocial.
Protect.
Safety.
Grow.
Discipleship.
Hmm. Of those words, which one of those words meant the most, or the one that you could think about most as to relating to what you do and how you actually relate that back out into the community?
I would say health.
Okay.
Yeah, simply because that is something that is germane not only to my role as a pastor, but obviously my role as a mental health clinician. And in both of those roles, it is my goal that in some way through my ministry, people can become more healthy. So whether that's more spiritually healthy, more emotionally healthy, more physically healthy, because I believe that God has made us tripart beings, meaning we have a body in which our soul and spirits live. And so I believe that it is God's desire that we move more and more towards health in each of those three parts, in terms of our physical being, our spirit man, and in terms of our soul, our mind, will, and emotions. So health is something that I believe is important to God. Jesus says in John 10:10, I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly, or have it to the full. And so I believe that implied in that statement is the whole issue of health.
So let's talk about this freelance writing because it's very, very interesting. As far as the articles that you've written and why you write these articles. Can you tell us what motivated you to start writing about politics, justice, racism, and faith?
I'll give you two words or two names.
Okay.
Donald Trump. Oh my goodness. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't want to be too partisan here, but let's just say that when Trump became president in 2016, uh, it was something that personally impacted me. I literally, Charles, went into a period of mourning when he became president because, I had discerned what kind of person he was and what kind of division or divisiveness, he potentially could bring to our nation. Of course, now here we are, 8 years later, and we're seeing the fruit of that. Um, One of the things that was disturbing to me as a Christian was that uh, in his first two runs for the presidency in 2016 and 2020, he received about 81% uh, of the white evangelical vote. Um, and I have trafficked in those circles. I've been adjacent to those circles, and it's been very concerning that people who profess to be Christians have chosen to support what I believe to be the most amoral, corrupt, racist, xenophobic president of our modern times. And so, therefore, much of my writing has been intended to unpack why that is the case and to also offer some remedies to that.
Ooh, you're saying a whole lot about that, and that right there, that sparks more than just conversation. But I will tell you this: we'll have to cover that on another show because I got a lot to say about that. And believe me, just as you write, and when I blog about that, and I've also talked about that on
Yeah.
some of my shows because it's very important that people understand the difference between somebody to try and be good enough to lead the free world than to be somebody that's a repressionist and everything else
Hmm.
that wants to try to lead the free world. That's
Yes.
not it.
Hmm.
How do you choose the topics you write about in your articles?
Um, I choose them kind of similarly to how I determine what I'm going to preach on from Sunday to Sunday. Um, my pastor, who licensed me to preach, used to tell me all the time, Joel, if you want to be an effective preacher, uh, preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. Of course, now 30 years later, uh, a lot of times we don't have physical newspapers, we have the internet and we have social media. And so by looking at what folks are talking about on social media, how people are engaging the issues of politics and racism. That oftentimes gives me a glimpse into what I need to be writing about. Um, More recently, I've written a piece that has to do with uh, racist propaganda, and what gave that, what was the impetus for that particular piece that I wrote was obviously the whole debacle with Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance, uh, spreading these lies about Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating cats and dogs and all sorts of things. So I wrote a piece that the premise of the piece was simply that if people are spreading racist propaganda, that is an offense against the image of God. Since we are all created in his image, it should never be said of us that we're saying or doing anything that would be disrespectful to our fellow human beings. So, the things that happen in our current events, the things that certain political leaders might do, oftentimes serve as inspiration for what I'm going to write about.
So, can you describe the process you go through when writing an article on a complex issue?
Uh, the first thing oftentimes that happens is I'll get inspiration for a particular title. Um, and when I look at the title generally will give the reader a glimpse of what I'm going to be focused on. And then, in addition to the title, um, I believe that somewhere in the first, second, or third paragraph, there needs to be a thesis statement, a statement that basically summarizes what I'm looking to get across to the reader. So I'll develop the title, a thesis statement. Um, the article has an introduction, the body, and conclusion. And oftentimes within the body of a particular opinion piece, I'll have several points that I would want to make. And so, uh, just like when I'm structuring a sermon, each opinion piece or essay that I write, has a particular structure to it. And it really doesn't take long for me to get a skeleton of the opinion piece that I'm writing. Then what I need to do is kind of spend some time in prayer and thought and research. And that's how I'm able to put the meat on the bones.
So let me ask you this. I don't know if you did or not. If you wrote a piece about the Breonna Taylor situation. If you did not, can you tell me what is your opinion of that?
Yeah, so I did write a piece on the Breonna Taylor situation. In fact, I can send it to you. Perhaps you could put it in the show notes. Um, I wrote a piece for the Courier Journal, which is our local newspaper here in Louisville. And the piece was written after the Department of Justice uh, had done their investigation and had come out with some public statements about some things that were wrong with the Louisville Metro Police Department. And so I wrote a piece. See if I can remember the title. The title of the piece was Responding to the Receipts, the Way Forward for the Louisville Metro Police Department. And so I basically, in the piece referring to the Breonna Taylor situation, I basically mapped out a specific plan, a proposed plan by which the Louisville Metro Police Department could move forward in such a way that is rooted in justice, in such a way where police officers would be held accountable to treat every citizen with respect. and to not engage in the excessive use of force. Um, Now, to what extent the police department may have, seen that article and applied the things that I talked about, I'm kind of doubtful that very much has been done up to this point. But at the very least, I was able to articulate, a specific plan that, I believe that if every major urban police department, employed these things that I talked about, that it would lead to a better relationship between the police, law enforcement, and the citizens of uh, any particular city. And a lot of it has to do with accountability. And unfortunately, we have the Fraternal Order of Police is a union that exists, and I'm sure it fulfills some valid purposes, but unfortunately, I think what has happened is because it's such an incredibly strong union and politically engaged, it has stood in the way of police accountability.
Ooh, again, we'll have to catch that on another show because they'll talk about that fraternal order of police.
Hmm.
Mm, mm-mm, that don't work.
Yeah.
Um, how do you ensure your writing is both impactful and accessible to a wide audience?
I, whenever I write an article, it goes through at least 3 or 4 different drafts. And it's a fine tuning process. And in the fine tuning process, I will actually have um, other writers, friends of mine, to review. I'll have family members or friends who are not necessarily writers to review it. And I will open myself up to any constructive feedback. And based upon that feedback, I'll make any adjustments that need to be made. But by the time that an article of mine is published, there have been several sets of eyes placed on it, not just mine, but the eyes of other individuals whom I believe can give to me some constructive feedback. Um, and, that's a process that, for some articles, it may take a day or two. For other articles, it may take a week, a 2-week period, or even a month. It kind of depends upon each article.
Hmm. What has been the most challenging article you've written and why?
Uh, um, I would say, in some ways, the one that I've just had published. My most recent article is titled, see if I can remember, Black Bodies Provide Cover for Republican Racism.
Ooh,
So, yeah,
when did that one come out?
it, yeah,
I definitely need to read that.
that is currently online on Baptist News Global. Somebody can simply put in their search engine Baptist News Global, and you can put my name there. Um, or you can simply put the title of the article, and it should pop up. Black Bodies Provide Cover for Republican Racism. So basically, in this particular piece, I was looking at um, this most recent cadre of Black Republicans that have become more prominent during the Trump era. And so I touch on 3 particular Black Republicans, and that would be Tim Scott from South Carolina, senator. That would be Representative Byron Donalds.
Florida.
And then the third one is Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who's currently in the gubernatorial race in North Carolina. And so I spotlight those three, and I talk about the fact that the Republican Party in its current iteration only elevates a particular kind of African American politician. It is usually a man, because the Republican Party tends to be very patriarchal. And it is a Black man who is willing to be a mouthpiece for white supremacy. It is a Black man who is willing to say the things with which white
people want to say.
Yeah. It is, for instance, Tim Scott has come out publicly and he denies the existence of systemic racism. And that has become, if you want to rise in the current Republican Party under Trump, as a Black politician, you have to be willing to deny systemic racism. You have to be willing to go against affirmative action. You have to be willing to make any number of compromises. And in the article, I make reference to Clay Cane, who recently wrote a book entitled The Grift. And Mr. Cane does a marvelous job, focusing on, what would motivate these Black politicians in the GOP. What would motivate them to sell out, to support policies that are anti-Black, to make statements that are not rooted in racial justice? What exactly would motivate them to do that? And basically what it comes down to one word: power. The desire for power, the desire to be white adjacent, to have proximity to white power. And so you have people like Tim Scott, and I say this literally in the article, that he did just about everything but tap dance and play a banjo to become Mr. Trump's vice presidential pick. Of course, he was not chosen, which was no surprise to me at all. But It just was very, very sad to see the extent to which he was willing to go to have proximity to white power.
Well, I want to ask you another question about that article, because I'm sure that I'm going to read that, but I've got to actually get this. But I want to ask this question, and normally I would say this would be another one of those things that I say I want to reserve this to another time, but I have to ask this now.
Okay.
That is, besides these folk in the Republican Party paying these people an enormous amount of money to get out there and to be and to get out there and do the tap dancing for the white folk, in order to get praise, also to repress other Black folk, that have come from the same era, same situations in which they come from, where they're also playing gatekeeper to keep those people out. But then the final thing to that is, in the process of doing all those things, what do you think they are really in love with running around here looking like clowns? Because you have some that's in entertainment that's doing that as well. They're running around here looking like clowns.
Right.
And those that don't really understand, but understand face recognition and say, because they're doing it, they're going to do it too. Do you think this is this Black men for Trump thing? Do you think that that's like one of the biggest and strongest problem that we have as Black people in general?
Now, you're talking about those Black men that are prominent in the GOP currently, or just Black men in general who
It's
appear
both. It's
Deciding.
both because they've actually consolidated.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I don't believe that as many black men are going to vote for Trump as what we're seeing and hearing in the media. Um, I think that, for one, whenever polls are done, you have to look at, how large was the sample size? Was it really representative of who's out there? I think what has happened is that you have particular black entertainers, hip hop artists that, for whatever reason, have cozied up to Trump. Obviously, Kanye West is one. I believe Lil Wayne might be another. And, obviously, these individuals, they are social media influencers, and they do wield some degree of influence with our young African American males. Um, so I think some of what we're seeing is a result of that modeling that is taking place. Um, and the other piece is, because we live in a social media driven world, there are so many conspiracy theories out there. And you have, in my estimation, some misguided young black men who have been duped into thinking that Donald Trump is somehow going to do more for black people than any other president, which is really quite ludicrous. But because you have individuals that are low information people, meaning that they get most of their information from Facebook or TikTok, little sound bites or whatever, and they just take it and run with it. But I think what is missing, not just within black males, but the populace in general, is critical thinking skills, the ability to do research beyond what certain politicians say is the truth, so that you can come to your own conclusion that is well informed. But unfortunately, by this being very much a social media driven generation, an era of American history, you have people who are especially vulnerable to propaganda. And of course, Mr. Trump and his imps are very much into propaganda.
Mhm.
But again, I don't think, in the final analysis, I don't think that percentage wise, there will be very many black men that will be supporting Mr. Trump. I really do not believe that.
Well, again, everybody has the right to vote for who they want to vote for. I
Sure.
don't take that away, but I just hate the idea that they come across with these lies that actually really influence a lot of people, and
Yeah.
that's my concern.
Mm.
Um, so, in closing, can you give our audience some things to feed on, some things you think they should know and carry forward as we finish out the rest of this wonderful year?
Sure. So, first and foremost, before I forget, people can follow me on Twitter, or what's now known as X, at Joel A. Bowman Sr., at JOEL Bowman, BOWMAN SR, is my handle on X. I generally am pretty good about putting my thoughts out there, which are oftentimes very provocative. They're intended to get attention and to cause people to think. Then also, I do have a website, and the website is acompellingvoice.com. Acompellingvoice.com. And they'll find a number of things that I've written, some sermons that I've preached. For instance, I preached a sermon entitled A Christian Perspective on Police Brutality. And that sermon is actually on my website. So there are any number of things that are there. But in closing, I do want to say this, that all of us as human beings are broken in some kind of way. We are imperfect. We have weaknesses. We have struggles. And in the final analysis, it takes courage to seek help, whether that's the help of your pastor or some other church leader, a brother or sister in the congregation, or on the mental health side. It takes courage to seek out therapy or counseling. It takes courage to seek out the services of a psychiatrist or nurse practitioner who can prescribe mental health medication. It does take courage to ask for help. And I know that for a lot of our people in the Black community, we have for so long had to be resilient and strong that sometimes we fail to reach out for help. And I know that there are any number of barriers to that. The history of racism, we can think about the Tuskegee experiment and Henrietta Lacks and, other situations in which medical professionals have been abusive and exploitive of us as Black people. But let me kind of normalize it for people out there that if you break your leg or if you need some sort of surgery on your knee, you're going to go to a specialist that's going to provide you with treatment to address the issue with your knee. And likewise, if people are experiencing relational difficulties or they're experiencing difficulties as it relates to their mood or their mental health, then it is incumbent upon them to reach out to individuals who specialize in those areas. And, we don't fault people who have diabetes for taking metformin or insulin. That's just par for the course. That's part of the standard treatment for diabetes. Uh, Nor should a person feel ashamed if they have a chemical imbalance in their brain and they need psychiatric medication. I'm not ashamed to say that I am in therapy currently and that I've been on psychiatric medication for well over 15 years. And so I say that to help people to see that you don't have to be crazy or cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, whatever we say, about mental illness, all of the stigma. You can be a regular person with regular problems that just need some additional help. And it does not make you weak. It does not make you less of a Christian. One of the stigmas in the church is that, one of the misnomers, I should say, in the church is, all I need is Jesus. All I need to do is pray and read the word, and that's it. Well, I believe, obviously, in the power of Christ. I believe he has all power. I believe in the sufficiency of scripture. But guess what? God gives us people that are there who are skilled and they are trained to help us. In fact, I heard a Christian hip hop artist say it this way back in the day. He said, last part of Jesus is us. The last part of Jesus is us. And so what that means to me is that Jesus works through people. We are his hands and feet. And it does not make us less of a Christian or less of a person of faith if we have to reach out for help.
Well, I want to thank you for that, and hopefully we can have you back on the show again.
Love
For
to do it.
those of, for those of you that are out there watching and you're on the YouTube channel, please hit the subscriptions button as well as the notifications button. So every time we have a show, you will be able to watch the show or watch it whenever you'd like to. You will also have the option of actually watching all of the shows that we have broadcasted. I'd like to thank Reverend Bowman for giving us some time where we can actually reflect not only of the people in our communities as to what we look like and the things that we feel, but some ways in which we can actually come to solve these issues. So, for all of you that are watching, please have a good night. Please join us tomorrow night as we have another great show.